If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in John chapter 13. So I just want to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be doing going from here first before we dive in. So I know we've been in Matthew. You guys were aware of that? Some of you, we've been in Matthew for a while, right? And we're not going to be able to finish it, right? Honestly, I don't think we would have finished it with another year. I think we still have about 60 more sermons left in that series. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of the last couple weeks from here till I'm done in mid-June. I'm going to jump around Matthew and try to tie a bow on it the best that I can. So for those of you who've just been waiting for more Matthew, it's coming. Okay, so today we're talking in John, and we're going to look at the story where Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and so John's gospel is considered the fourth and really probably the latest gospel that's written, and so in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, these are called anyone know the synoptic gospels, right? They're the synoptic gospel, which kind of means all that really means is like one lens. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar in style and structure, the way that they're presenting Jesus and trying to show us kind of who Jesus is and why he came. Now, again, comes in much later. He does some things differently, and I've mentioned this before, but John likes the word signs versus the synoptic gospels. They like the word miracle. Like when Jesus does a miracle, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they just call it a miracle usually. But John always, he usually calls it a sign. And the reason for that is because the miracle is not the point of what's happening in our Gospels. The point is who did the miracle and what does it mean? And so John kind of takes us from wow to oh. Right? It's like, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you have these miracles. Like, wow, look at all Jesus is doing. Look at what Jesus can do. And John, it's like, I want you to see who Jesus is. I want you to see what Jesus is about. And so that's a bit of the difference. It's kind of it's an O instead of a wow. So when we get to the kind of the famous Last Supper, right? This is when this event takes place. The synoptic gospels are kind of showing us what's happening on the table, right? You have communion, right? There's debate, there's betrayal announced, right? There's foreshadowing that Jesus gives, and so the table, right, is a big moment for the church, and it's why we as Methodists we celebrate, or at least here we celebrate communion once a month, at least once a month. I think in the last month, I think we've done it twice. But because it's a huge moment for the church, it's a remembering of what Jesus did and why he did it, and so we participate in that because it's crucial. But what John is doing, if the synoptics are showing us what happens on the table, John wants us to show us what happens under the table. What's going on the ground? What is Jesus doing here? And so in John chapter 13, we can pick up at verse 1. It says this: Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. And so this phrase John likes, the hour. Right? John talks a lot about the hour. When Jesus is speaking, he talks about, my hour has not come yet. My hour has not come. And he kind of repeats that throughout the gospel. A lot like, I think last time we were together, we were in Mark. And remember Mark's phrase was, does anyone remember? I don't have a prize. On the way, right? Remember, we was on the way. And so in Mark's gospel, Jesus is always on the way. And in John, it's always about getting to the hour. Getting to the hour. And so that's where we're at right now. And so he says this. He says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, and it means, for sure, that Jesus is aware of all that's happening, right? He knows the end is coming. He knows his hour, right, has arrived. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. He knows the crowds that were just shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna to the highest, right? That they will be shouting, crucify him, crucify him. He knows that. He knows that his disciples are going to fall asleep in the garden. Peter is going to deny knowing him, that he's going to be betrayed by Judas, and that his disciples will abandon him at the cross. Right? All of that is in his view. And so that kind of makes us understand what's happening. So knowing it is all right in front of him, it makes the passage so much more powerful. And so in verse 2 it says this: the devil had already decided that Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, would betray Jesus. Now, I don't know if when you read your Bibles, I like to object to God sometimes, right? When a moment like this happens, like for me, it's like Jesus. Couldn't we convince Judas, to not go through with this, right? Couldn't you figure out another way to do this? Like he's right there in the room. Why not, call him out by name? I'm sure the disciples will gladly handle it. Peter's been waiting to use his sword, right? There's it's like, why isn't, Jesus, do something? And what I want to tell you, I think one of the hardest things to grasp about God is God's uncontrolling love. Because listen, if God controls the situation, then we don't actually have any real choice in it, do we? We have to have choice. So if we don't have choice, we can't actually love. Have you ever tried to make someone love you? Right? It's like that's not love, right? So freedom to choose and not to choose the right thing is what God does for us, allows us those choices. That's uncontrolling love. God never forces love. God does something different. God does not override, but God meets us in these spaces. And so he goes on in verse 2, he says, and during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God. Now this kind of elevates the tension a little bit more, because you have to remember who Jesus is for John. You have to go back to John chapter 1, verse 1 and verse 14, where it says, the Word, I might as well read it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? And then verse 14 says, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. Right? So when we're talking about Jesus, like John is saying, we're also talking about God. Right? This is God in the story. This is so when he says that, hey, when Jesus said, I've got all authority, he means all authority, right? Like he could do all the things. Anything that needs to be done, he could do. He could call down angels, right? He could fight off the guards when they try to arrest him, right? He could raise up an army to wipe out Rome. He can put the Pharisees in their place. He can do all that. He has all authority. Instead, look at what he does. Verse 4. He got up from supper, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. So in the middle of a meal, God gets up. God gets up and he wraps a towel around him. And it says, then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. And so Jesus doesn't just take the position of a servant in this moment, right? He actually takes the appearance of a servant as well, right? Because he didn't have to do all that to wash their feet, right? He could have washed their feet how he was dressed. But he changes even his outer garments to take the form of a servant. And so this is so cool. So there's an echo of what Paul talks about to the Philippian church in Philippians 2:5. Notice how similar this is. Verse 5 says, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, right? But emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, right? Assuming human likeness and being found in appearance as a human, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross, right? That's what we're getting with God. So this is what real power does. Real power, like real authority that Jesus has. It doesn't coerce and it doesn't control, right? It doesn't intimidate, it doesn't dominate. It doesn't manipulate. Because these are the things we like to do with power when we get it, right? We like to control. And so Jesus shows us what it looks like when we have all the authority, what we do, how we respond, right? He serves. Like, he really serves. Not in a symbolic way. Like, as Jesus with all power, he becomes servant, right? Becomes a servant. As God with all power, like, God chose to enter into not just the world, but into Palestine, into the Middle East, right? As a poor Jew with a poor family, under occupation of Rome, right? It's the same. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, what's the lowest I can be? And so to be under authority, and so that's what God does. God does not coerce and does not push us, does not control us, but God chooses power, chooses to serve with God's power. Are we tracking? Good. All right. So, and again, this is a constant theme, right? That we've been. I feel like I've said a lot. Especially when we were back in Matthew 5, and we were talking about the Beatitudes. What Jesus is doing all the time is flipping our idea of religion on its head, flipping our idea of power on its head. And so there's a story in Mark chapter 10 that I added it this morning. I thought we needed to talk about this. So Mark chapter 10, because this is what we do. This is very natural for us. And we already said that when we have power, we want to coerce, we want to control. And so we see that and Jesus, he's already said, like, we're washing feet. He's not empowered. Like, he's not going to take over Rome. He's not going to do all these things. But look at what Mark talks about. He says this: James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." That's bold, right? Like Jesus, I'm going to ask you something. I need you to say you're going to do it first, right? Anytime your kids do that to you, you're like, no, right? So, and so we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Appoint us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." What is that? That's the human thing, right? It's like, hey, Jesus, like, we know you're going to rule and reign. So it'd be really cool if we were like number 1 and 2, right? Like, we can rule, reign, and then we'll help out, but we really want to be at the top. Like, we really want to be at the top of this hierarchy with you. And Jesus' response in verse 42, Jesus called to them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles," which is just non-Jews, "whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them. And their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Instead, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." That's who we're called to be. Not people trying to get to the top of an organizational chart, right? But people who are searching for the bottom of it, right? To lift up those who are at the bottom. Like, that's what Jesus has done, and that's what he calls us to do. And it's like, if this is what God does with power, it changes everything for us. If you consider yourself a Christian, hear me on this. This is the God you worship. This is the Jesus we're called to model our lives around. So the God who takes off his robe and kneels before people who are undeserved, and he knows will fail them. That's an amazing God. That's amazing grace, right? And this is not a God who can put into your political or socioeconomical box. Right? God is not Democrat, God is not Republican, American, Russian, Iranian, Persian, or, hear me, Israeli. Right? God is one who sees all people as valuable and image bearers of the divine. Every single one of us, known and loved by their Creator. Right? If you're a Christian, your allegiance is to God's kingdom before all others. That's who we're called to be. That's who Jesus was teaching us to be in the Sermon on the Mount. But what does foot washing look like for us? Like not the ceremony, but actually like in the world. Because if you start taking people's shoes off and getting half naked at work, it's not going to go well for you, right? Not going to go well for you, right? So, but what does it mean? Like, what is that? So how does it look in our worlds? And so it's like you can choose to serve people you know would never serve you. That's tough, right? People may not, like, you may serve people that don't like you. Are there people, sometimes people don't like you. That happens, right? They have one in the back. Doesn't like me, but yeah. That didn't sound, if you, it's like, well, what if we stop trying to force our way? Like, what if we stop trying to manipulate the powers that be to get to the top? Stop trying to force our way. Love people that would willingly take us out if they had the opportunity. Are we trying to control outcomes more than serve those who are at the bottom of life? And so the question is good. It's, well, do you want to be great? Like, because the brothers, they were like, we want to be great, you know? And so the question, well, how do you become great? You know? And what I've found that works the best is to find the place that no one wants to be. Find the role that no one wants to fill. Find things that feel small and do those things with excellence. When before my wife and our family and I came here, I had pastored in Lorain County for about 10 years. And we left, and we were looking for a church home, and so we ended up at this place in Avon. And so I went and met. I'd met the pastor before, and I said, hey, I left my church. There was some stuff going on, and so I say, hey, I'm just here, just want to help, right? Just want to serve. And listen, I've been preaching for 10 years. I had my undergrad in church ministry. Like, I'm here for you. And he goes, well, I need a parking lot person. Now listen, the parking lot is very important. I think we should have people in the parking lot, but I'm not going to lie to you. That hurt my ego. All right, it hurt my ego a little bit, because I was not in that headspace, and so God was trying to teach me something. And so what I did is I just went out in the parking lot week after week. I think we were there for about 3 different seasons. So I think there was some snow, and I think I dressed up as Santa once. So I was doing the little thing, but trying to do them really, really well. And so then when we came here, I was like, okay, I've already had my ego checked, right? And so when we came here, we just said, we just want to serve, right? We just want to serve the pastors. We just want to serve the people that are doing ministry. Try to be the people we wish we had when we were in ministry. And so then COVID hit, right? And we weren't allowed to come. And I have to come, okay? I have to come to church. And so I'm like, how do I get in the building now, right? So listen, I love the church. You're just not going to keep me out. So I was like, well, what do you need, And so they said, well, we could use a camera guy. And I was like, I already learned my lesson about the parking lot, all right? You know what I mean? So I'm like, I'm going to do this. And listen, I had a blast with it, right? I mean, I was all over the place. I was trying to do it excellent, right? And do all these things. And it's like, and then hey, do you want to preach? Hey, do you want to do this? Hey, and now 5 years later or whatever it is, I'm Methodist now, right? I'm going to graduate my master's degree that's fully paid for by the Methodist Church, and now I'm planting a church again in Lorain, and it's like, but don't hear this, because it's not a strategy. Serving isn't a strategy to get to the top. It's just what Jesus calls us to be. He calls us to serve, to do the little things, to find out where you can fit, and to get into those spaces. So, listen, I didn't see any of that coming. I didn't see any of that coming for us. But we knew that serving is the closest way to be near the heart of Jesus. Because that's where you would find Jesus, is in the small places. Now, fast forward a few chapters, and we've kind of seen in Jesus what it looks like with full power and full authority for Jesus. Now let's look at what happens when systems have power and authority, right? So this is what they do. Judas is turned, right? He agrees to betray Jesus for money. So that's manipulation of loyalty. And we see that. And so it's a friend becomes a doorway. The Romans used the night to arrest Jesus. So timing is controlled, right? So their manipulation of visibility. They move in the shadows. A kiss from Judas, right, is used as a signal. That's identification through intimacy, right? And so that's manipulation of trust. Like, this is what powers do, right? What have we said before? Like empires protect systems and eliminate threats. Like, that's what power does. A crowd is stirred up, right? Chief priests in Matthew 27, they persuade the crowd. And so manipulation of public opinion. I know that doesn't happen anymore, so we can move on. False witnesses are brought forward, right? And so you have inconsistent testimonies, manipulation of truth. Truth gets bent to fit the outcome. Religious law is weaponized. This is all happening within the next few chapters before you get to the cross. So blasphemy charges. So they manipulate theology even, right? That doesn't happen anymore either, right? So Pilate plays political games. He knows Jesus is innocent, but caves. It's manipulation of justice. Again, something that still goes on. Barabbas is offered as a contrast, right? The crowd chooses a revolutionary because they want the kind of power that they understand, that they didn't really understand what Jesus was doing. And then fear of Rome is leveraged. If you release him, you're no friend of Caesar. So manipulation of fear, and fear drives the final decision. So do you see that the cross isn't something that just happened to Jesus? It's what power does. Protect systems, eliminate threats, right? Everyone in this story is trying to control the outcome. And yet Jesus never once tries to take control back. The world, empires, and we at times, right? We at times are trying to be in control, and Jesus, who has all the power, all the authority, uses it to give himself away. And so the cross shows us a couple things. It shows us what God does with power. Jesus doesn't take control back. He doesn't call it off. He doesn't overpower the moment. He gives himself away fully, freely, completely. The one who has all authority in his hand stretches them out to be nailed to a cross. Not because he has to. Not because he has to, but because that's who Jesus is. And so the cross isn't just about what happens to Jesus. It reveals who God is. If you want to know what power looks like without love, look at the cross. If you want to know what love looks like with power, look at the cross. The towel to wash the feet is just a preview. The cross is the full picture. God bless you, church.